I am just getting started here today. I am aware that some of you joined on LinkedIn 2 hours ago. Um, there was a time zone snafu. I'm going to partially take responsibility for it, but also LinkedIn's way of setting up time zones on their scheduled live streams is extremely confusing. So I'm going to blame them more than myself. But we're just getting started here, and I'm using new technology today. I'm using something called Riverside FM. So we're going to try this out together. And I also have I'm actually broadcasting on YouTube as well. So I've got both streams open so I can see the chats as they're coming in. And if you have any issues with any of it, you can let me know. So this will just be a little bit of a test run in a way. I'm checking to make sure that the live stream is working on LinkedIn. Let's see. I see it is working on YouTube. So if you're there, let's see what might be going on here. And as I'm getting started here, let's see. I'm going to pause the stream. Live on LinkedIn. I'm seeing us on YouTube again, not seeing us on LinkedIn. So I'm very, very hopeful that let's see. Let me just make sure that everything is good. Thank you for bearing. Okay, we do appear to be working. All right, wonderful. Hey everybody. So as I mentioned, I'm trying out new software today. It's called Riverside FM, and we're gonna learn this new technology together. So in the Pacific, 12 of you who showed up 2 hours ago being like, Carrie, where are you? I was still in bed. That's the answer. But we got it figured out. We're here now. We're live. And I can see all of the chats on both YouTube because we are live on YouTube as well as on LinkedIn. And I can see any chat messages that come through. So feel free to make this an interactive conversation. That's what I'm hoping for today is I don't have all the answers to this big moment that we're currently in, but that's what I want to talk about today with all of you. And this is obviously not a one-time conversation. This is a part of what I called in the title of this event, a larger vibe shift that's happening, which is a term that was coined by a I feel like he is like a branding expert or designer, but it's essentially this feeling, just this like sense that we have that we can't quite put our finger on of things shifting and changing. And I've been talking to a lot of community managers over the last year and a half. I always talk to a lot of community managers. I've been talking to a lot of community managers for over 10 years. But in the last year and a half, there is a huge shift happening energetically within our profession or our industry, whatever you want to call it. And I wanted to talk about it. I want to talk about it so that we can help to shift it, take back some control over it. Maybe you can't control everything for sure, but if we have this conversation, if we can name what's going on, then we can move forward together a lot more powerfully. So that's what I want to talk to you about today. That's what I want us to talk about today and moving forward. And then I have to do an obligatory sharing that our community, the CMJ community, launched 2 weeks ago. It is currently open at a discounted rate until today at 11:59 Eastern. You can join at any time, but you will save $20 per month in perpetuity if you sign up today before 11:59 Eastern time. And it's free for 7 days, so you can give it a look around. see if it's interesting to you, and join conversations like these in our space. So, with that, let's talk about what community really means in 2024, because when you look around, the world is in disarray. And over the last 10 years, I've watched people use community in all kinds of contexts, from social media to when we're talking about like social good efforts by large corporations. The word community has been thrown around a lot, a lot, a lot, a lot. And it continues to be thrown around a lot. But the environment around us is now changing. So we live now in a world of permacrisis, which means that there is just constant crises going on around us. And there is, I'm not going to bring the vibe too far down in this chat, but I just want to give us some clarity that there is obviously economic uncertainty going on right now. Like the Fed is talking about lowering interest rates, which is a result of people not being employed, which is going to hopefully help inflation go down. But then also that means people don't have jobs. But then it's all messed up, right? Like it's all messed up. Nobody really understands what's going on. There's elections that are going on all across the world. It's creating immense political uncertainty. There are protests going on across college campuses around the US, around the world. Unfortunately, my alma mater, UCLA, has done a horrific job of working with these protesters and working to enable peaceful protest. If you haven't been following the news on that, I recommend checking it out. It is disappointing, and also part of this vibe shift that there are people who are ready to and willing to put their bodies on the line for is just such a strong fight back against that shift, against those changes. And so there's just constant chaos going on around us. Misinformation is everywhere now, especially with artificial intelligence and the creation of content, both visual and text-based, around artificial intelligence. And human beings are not trusting each other right now. There's not a clear storyline for any of this, and maybe there really never was, but it's become very, very clear that we are more polarized all across the world. At the same time, there's all of this war happening, there's climate change happening, and as human beings, we need each other more than we have ever needed each other before. More than ever, ever, ever before. And yet we're more afraid of each other. We're more isolated. And I think for many of us, we're more exhausted than we've ever been before. And so we're in this moment where there's this deep, deep, deep desire, and yet more overpowering fear of the other. And so as community builders, that is the environment that we are currently building in. And so it's a lot easier to build spaces in our communities that are transactional, where someone can come in, get what they need, and then leave. You know, that's great. But that's not the deep, deep work that needs to be done at this time. And I think that as community builders, we can see our role as being so much larger, so much more significant than it is. And we've historically been left out of a lot of these conversations around the economy, around political change, around power shifts and power dynamics. And that's a huge loss to us as professionals, but also to these conversations, because we have a huge emphasis on relationship building in our work, and that's missing. It's very much missing in many of these conversations. And so we have so much expertise to bring to these conversations. We have so much insight to bring to them, and it's not being brought. So that's why I want to have this conversation right now, because our current moment feels horribly scary for a lot of us. It can feel really crushing if you start to think about the realities of it. But there is a better way. There are better ways for us to move forward. And I believe with every fiber of my being that community builders know the better way and that we can lead the better way. Does that mean that we are the sole leaders in this? Absolutely not, because we as community builders know that nothing worth doing can be done alone. So I was just reflecting on this over the weekend as I was preparing for this conversation with you today, and thinking about kind of counter examples of this. And there's one that's very much top of mind for me because I just moved to a farm. I actually live like next to my best friend now, in Northern California. And on the farm, my friend is building this kids summer camp. Well, her friend is building it. She's lending the land to her. It's like this whole community thing. And so she's creating this summer camp for kids to do art throughout the summer at the barn, which I can see out the window right now. And her friend's been here like almost every single day working on it. And on Sunday last week, we had what we called a work party where her friend assigned all these tasks for us to do. Kids were like running around. We brought baby Marlo and she sat in her stroller underneath a tree while we worked. And we shared a meal at the end of it. And this type of gathering is what I, again, with every fiber of my being, believe is going to help us heal and move forward. This is like an ancient way of building community, of coming together, of divvying up work to be done, of having a shared purpose, and then going out into the world, creating that purpose and building trust back up again. And so at the same time, I was watching my friend's friend as she was asking for this help, and I could tell she felt very awkward, like asking for this help from us, because asking for help and receiving help is very difficult. And as community builders, you probably know this intimately. I certainly do, where I know that if I were to make a clear ask, people would show up. But even articulating the clear ask is sometimes so difficult for me that I would rather just try to do it myself and try to articulate what it is that I need. But again, that is the work. That is the work. Trying to articulate where we need help and then receiving it with grace and um, with abundance. So that's the opportunity. It's an opportunity that we're gifting to people when we ask them for help. And I often share this with the clients that I coach, is that when you're making an ask, it's actually you're making an opportunity for someone else to be generous. And so as community builders in this moment of intense change, of crisis, of uncertainty, we know that we need help in all of it. And so bringing people together around whatever that might be is an extremely powerful thing. It's a powerful invitation. So let's bring all this back to our work as community builders now. I define the work of a community builder is our purpose is to gather people around some kind of shared identity or shared goal, shared outcome, and to craft mutual concern for one another's welfare during that time. And that's what's often missing in communities, is that crafting of the mutual concern for each other's welfare. A lot of us are really great at setting up forums and then telling people, here's the forum, go in there. But then it comes down to the actual relationship building, and it's like, okay, well, this is not measurable, so I'm not going to be able to spend my time doing it. And even if we want to do it, our organizations might pressure us to spend our time elsewhere. And so that, however, I think that is the most important part of our work right now. And there's a couple of shared principles that I would love for us to galvanize around as professionals right now. I think there's a couple of things that we can galvanize around in terms of what our opportunities are as community builders. So one of them is that our opportunity as community builders is to organize disconnected people in a place where they can trust that there will be free, open dialogue and unbiased information. That's one of the things that we can promise and attempt to deliver. We will never be able to do it perfectly in our work. So when I'm talking about the fact that we're in permacrisis, when I'm talking about the fact that there's uncertainty and distrust, and yet we need each other more than ever, well, how we can meet that moment as community builders is to craft spaces and physical places, in some cases, where we can host and moderate free, open dialogue. And that is so very rare in our world today. I mean, there's all of these like think tanks working on these problems, trying to figure out, okay, how do we continue the work of democracy? Like they're trying to figure out these questions, the answers to these questions. And we as community builders, we can help be the vehicles of the answers to those questions, if that makes sense. So that's one opportunity that we have. And I think we can and should step more into that opportunity in this moment as a profession. The second thing is that I think we can really be focusing more on creating a sense of belonging in the communities that we're in. And we've often been held back from prioritizing this focus in our work because we often work for organizations that talk about the warm fuzzies of creating a sense of belonging. But because you can never truly measure how strong a sense of belonging is in a community. I don't care who tells you otherwise. Like, it's not possible to measure it. Because of that, our organizations want to default to, okay, what can we measure? And so that's what gets prioritized. I was just at a conference, the Othering and Belonging Conference at UC Berkeley, and there was a researcher there. His entire focus is on looking at measures of sense of belonging over the last 40 years across disciplines. And he was saying that basically what I just shared with you, that it's impossible to ever truly accurately measure sense of belonging because a variety of social science reasons that I won't go into right now. And it's actually very risky for us to try to put an exact target on sense of belonging anyway, because in our culture, especially in our organizational cultures, once something is made measurable, we start to obsess over it. We start to try to see that number go up or see it decrease depending on what the number is, and we start to focus all of our efforts on it. And it's dangerous, because what if that measure is not actually telling us what we think it's going to tell us? So anyway, this is all to say that I still, regardless of whether we can measure accurately sense of belonging or not, it can and should be a focus of our work. And there are broad conversations going on in academic circles as well as in public health circles about sense of belonging, and community builders should be part of these conversations. And for the most part, they are not right now, but they should be, and we can be. We can enter these conversations. I am one person, so I can't I can't enter all of them. But if that is your area of focus, like, let's talk about that. Let's figure out how to get into those conversations more as community builders. The next thing I want to talk about is that our job as community builders can be to protect our members from large organizations or other kind of actors from coming in and exploiting the information and the conversations that happen inside of our communities. So this is specifically around artificial intelligence. And if you look at like Reddit, what Reddit has done. So Reddit obviously has millions and millions and millions, maybe even billions of conversations that have happened on that platform that are impossible to duplicate anywhere else because they're so specific, so niche. And so what Reddit has been able to do is scrape all of that information across all of those communities and sell that information to large language model companies and other organizations that can then exploit that information without giving credit back to its creators. And communities have essentially become just sources of raw data for these companies, sources of raw data that are going to improve large language models. And it's like looking at our communities as that's what they are is, oh, it makes my skin crawl. Thinking about it makes my skin crawl, but that is how people are looking at the value of communities today in this era of large language models and artificial intelligence really taking off and hitting the mainstream. So our job as community builders can be to protect that information, protect what gets shared in our communities, protect who it gets shared with, protect ownership and copyright information and things like that. And that means that we're probably going to have to stand up a lot more for our community members inside of our organizations and outside of our organizations, and advocate even more for the privacy and safety in our communities. So we have to step the F up around that. So that's going to be a huge, huge need for us as we're encountering this huge vibe shift, is we're going to have to become advocates, political advocates for our communities, political and organizational advocates. And the last thing that I want to talk about is that I think we can galvanize around the importance and need for bringing members together physically. My dog just got up. You might be able to hear him walking around. Bringing members together physically. So obviously we went through a pandemic that made it impossible for us to gather physically. Well, not impossible. It made it dangerous for us to gather physically. And I was just speaking with, I was at another conference earlier on, this was in 2023, of communications professionals and journalists. And I was speaking with a professional who his entire job is to gather community journalists and like at small newspapers, small media outlets around the US. And he was saying how it's so difficult because there's no physical space for these community journalists to come together. And so having a physical space is revolutionary. Um, there are huge conversations going on around what is public space in the future. How are we going to continue to have public space and public dialogue? There's a whole organization called New Public that's having these conversations, and we need to be part of those conversations because this is a risk to democracy if we don't have a place to gather physically, but it is extremely, extremely expensive and resource intensive to gather people physically. So running something as easy as a LinkedIn Live, which I already ran into like all these technical issues with this morning, is already difficult. If we had done this in person and I needed to change a venue or I needed to get catering and all that, it is so difficult and so expensive. And so in order to gather people physically, I think we need to start working on how we get funding for that because we're going to need AV professionals. We're going to, on our teams or in our contractor databases, we're going to need caterers. We're going to need first aid and all these other things when we're physically gathering folks. That's going to be so very, very important. And that doesn't come cheap. It shouldn't come cheap. And it's not easy to navigate the funding landscape. So I think more of us need to understand the grant writing process and how to work with foundations. This is something I am specifically extremely passionate about right now. And if anybody understands this process of grant writing and working with foundations in the US or elsewhere, please get in touch with me because I really want to work on this challenge. I think it's one of the biggest challenges of our time is how do we gather physically as community builders, as people who are very resource constrained, so that we can start to come together and improve our skills, improve our capacity, things like that. So, and this is all, it all ties back into like what I'm seeing on college campuses. The reason why college campuses are so effective, oftentimes students are so effective at gathering on college campuses, is because they have so much physical public space to do so. And the beauty of a university campus in the US is that it should be a space of free speech. And so when that is shut down, that obviously is a threat to a lot of things. But that is what makes universities so special and what makes them so powerful. And we all deserve spaces like that. We shouldn't have to go to college to have a public space where we can gather and advocate together. So there is a lot of work to be done there. And yeah, as I mentioned, if this is something that you're interested in, I want to work on this with you. So there are so many ways in which we can focus our profession, focus our work over the next several years. But I think these are just a couple of the ways that are serious and urgent for us to focus our time and efforts. Our work needs to become more about advocacy, more about physical gathering, more about protecting our members from protecting our members' privacy and information that is shared, creating a sense of belonging. These are all the things that we have the opportunity now to focus on. And I think if we focus on them and stop focusing so much on like the setup of the forum and getting out, like launching these smaller efforts, not that those aren't important because they are and we have to start somewhere, but we have to also enter these larger conversations in order for our profession to be taken seriously and to have a long-term trajectory. And I think our work is way too important not to do this around. So these are just some of my thoughts around what community means in 2024, what the profession is facing in 2024. And we're really at just this moment of massive shift, of massive transformation. I think a lot of us are really hungry for change. It's not just our profession, this is happening everywhere. I've found a lot of comfort in that personally because I realize that it's not just me, it's not just us. Like there's a large vibe shift happening, a large, large, large one. And so we just need to meet this moment. We need to meet it with all of our strength and all of our collective organizing powers. So, yeah, that's what I want to share today. As I mentioned, if this conversation is interesting to you, if it is important to you, I absolutely want you to check out our new community that we have just relaunched called the CMJ community. You can find more information about that at carriemelissajones.com/community. The price for the subscription on that goes up by $20 per month starting tonight at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. We're letting in all of our, we have a whole scholarship opportunity, so I'm letting in all these scholarship recipients today, but that's an ongoing process. So if you're interested in applying for scholarships, let me know. We also offer parity pricing. So depending on what region you're based in, we have between 10 and 90% discounts on the subscription to match cost of living differences across the world. So yeah, I would love for all of you to be part of this. If this is something that is important to you, it's obviously very, very important to me. I spend most of my waking hours thinking about community and what our role is as community builders in the future. And I think it is the most important role we could possibly play. Otherwise, I wouldn't spend my so much time on it. So yeah, I hope that this is interesting to you. I hope that it has brought up new questions for you, brought up new ideas for you. I am here as you navigate this pathway, and I can't wait to stay in touch with all of you. All of my respect to each and every single one of you for building communities in this world that is so disconnected. It's so very needed. Thank you, everybody, and I will see you on the internet. Bye.